I just want to take a few minutes to start talking about the EcoPark system. Just a high-level overview about what we are, what we're not, and why it's important to protect what we've been calling sort of a near-urban, or another word for it, peri-urban areas. Little area very close to a city that's not agriculture, basically, natural areas. I'll be talking more about the EcoPark system in the next 2 workshops, so this is just a really high-level overview. This shouldn't be a surprise to most folks who grow up in this area. What we're really talking about is this western tip of Lake Ontario. It's got 3 watersheds, the Grindstone, Spencer Creek, and Red Hill Creek, that all flow into Hamilton Harbor, which then flows into Lake Ontario. And it's an important place for ecological connections, with a lot of different landscapes, plants, and animals with them that live in them. And the way landscapes work, landscapes work is that the best way for them to function ecologically is if they're connected. And that's what the EcoPark system is all about. We're all about connections, connectivity, figuring out what connects to what. Really trying to make sure there is an ecological connection that remains between Lake Ontario, Hamilton Harbor, and this red swirl, the Niagara Escarpment. The Niagara Escarpment is a very special place. It is a designated UNESCO Biosphere Reserve, which by definition means a place where people live with nature. I think it's pretty stunning. I also think it's pretty incredible that Hamilton, historically been known as an industrial steel town, is just minutes away. You can kind of see it in the background of this photo. It is a place with a wonderful biodiversity of plants. Even after all the centuries of human use, there are a lot of special plants that live in this area. We know about them because of researchers. There's been a lot of them, but I'll focus on RBG for a second. A lot of RBG's story is of botanists cataloging and exploring RBG properties, seeing what's out there. One of the most recent studies we have suggests that there is over a quarter of Canada's plant life on RBG property alone. Again, that's pretty remarkable, not just for the number of species, but for the special species that are in this area. One is called the red mulberry. It's a species at risk, and it's Canada's most endangered tree. There's about, I think, 600 or so left across the country. They've been damaged by habitat loss and the introduction through a hybridization process of something called white mulberry. There's about 200 in our area that run along the escarpment on not only RBG property, but a few other partner EcoPark system partners as well. This little tiny fella is called the few flowered clubrush. It's a little sedge, sometimes called the bashful bulrush. In Canada, it can only be found in Cootes Paradise Marsh. There used to be a few at Rouge National Park, just sort of east of Toronto, but it hasn't been seen there in over a decade. One of RBG's key restoration projects is working with different agencies to figure out and understand this plant. What makes it tick? What makes it stay? What are some of its key issues? So I like the red mulberry and the bashful bulrush. I think they're an example of a very precious plants that are located in our urban area. Zooming out of Cootes Paradise Marsh and sort of the EcoPark system study area. Sorry, my cat has seen another cat and it's starting to attack it. So if I look that way, there's a fight happening. So Cootes Paradise and the EcoPark system study area is this red square shape. We zoom out to southern Ontario. We have to acknowledge that it's a densely populated and rapidly urbanizing area. We've got a population on the rise. We've got about 15 million people scheduled to be living in this area by 2051. And if COVID's shown us anything, it's that access to nature within a walking distance is really important for physical, mental health, but also as landowners, reducing flood risk, making neighborhoods cooler. We need it more than ever. We can't get away from urbanization. People need a place to live. And that's kind of the middle area that the EcoPark system is trying to work out, trying to find what works best between urban and natural areas to figure out good ways to survive and live with plants and wildlife, our neighbors. Oh, they're going at it. Anyway, so this green area is a bit deceiving because it does make it seem like there's a lot, but a lot of this actually is recovered from previous use. And today we've got a lot of pressures from our species, from humans. Fragmentation, the introduction of invasive species, things like road ecology, and the big honking one, climate change. All I'm really trying to say is that our little neck of the woods, the head of the lake, is really, really special. Fun fact, it's the last place along Lake Ontario that connects the Escarpment and Lake Ontario watersheds that doesn't have a highway or other significant urban development running through it. I'm specifically talking about Cootes Paradise, going up through Dundas, a place called Pleasant View, up to the Escarpment. And we've known a lot about it for a long time. There's a strong history of collaboration to protect these pockets of natural areas going back to the 1900s. RBG in the early 1900s coming together to protect Cootes Paradise Marsh. Before that, what is now the Hamilton Naturalist Club, working hard to designate Cootes Paradise Marsh as a bird sanctuary. In the 1950s, conservation authorities came into the picture. 70s and 80s, and even today, the Hamilton Harbor Remedial Action Plan, a group of a lot of different organizations, stakeholders around our communities coming together to essentially clean up Hamilton Harbor. A lot of these groups joined up and became the EcoPark system. In 2013, 9 agencies, including the Bruce Trail Conservancy, City of Burlington, Conservation Halton, Halton Region, City of Hamilton, Hamilton Conservation Authority, Hamilton Naturalist Club, McMaster University, of course, RBG, came together and decided that we want to be able to cooperate and work together to protect those natural green spaces between Hamilton Harbor and the Niagara Escarpment. This slide keyword here is cooperation. Want to make sure these agencies who are landowners in the area have natural areas are working together. We have a common goal. We want to protect, restore, and connect them. So let's do it. A lot of our work involves securing ecological corridors, a lot of local stewardship projects, awareness raising, and encouraging appropriate use. We do land securement as well. If there are properties available, try and snag them. Funding and restoration for stewardship and new approaches. Research is a big piece of our work as well. What we're not is a group that's trying to get regulatory powers over partner agencies. They can do whatever they want on their properties. They own their properties, or private landowners. That's not our mission. That's not our value or our goal. We're there filling the grout, if that's another way of looking at the EcoPark system. We work hard to find the gaps between partner agencies and interested landowners to see what we can do together. It's a gap filling exercise. So since 2013, we've done quite a bit of work. I'll be highlighting a lot of this throughout the remaining 2 workshops, but just really quickly, healthy ecosystems obviously is a focus of ours. A lot of stewardship projects, which you'll be learning about. Human experience is a key one, making sure people who live here actually have access to these natural areas. An event like this is a really good example. We want to highlight places like Hidden Valley Park and show people that they're there, and there's really great biodiversity, plants and animals that you can experience. We love being innovative and looking at new ways of protecting and maintaining natural areas in and around urban areas One exciting one that we'll be talking about next week is our wildlife corridor project. Partnerships is huge, not only between our partners, but with other stakeholders, other groups. We do a lot of work on private landowners as well. So that's our jam as well. And overall, we've raised just over $10 million for our programming and events since about 2013. So here is a vision map of the EcoPark system. There are two reference points that I think folks should be familiar with. We've got Cootes Paradise and Hamilton Harbor. So whenever I say the EcoPark system or the EcoPark system study area, this is what I mean. It's areas along sort of Hamilton and Burlington, just outside of downtown Hamilton, around Cootes Paradise, going up to the Niagara Escarpment. This is Highway 5, all the way to Branch Street in Burlington, and then sort of down Plains Road, above the 403 highway, along an area that we call North Aldershot. Like I mentioned last week, it's filled with a lot of interesting plant and wildlife that I'll sort of focus in on for a few minutes. Cootes Paradise is a focal point. It's a river mouth marsh with 16 creeks, 25 kilometers of shoreline, and just a magnificent wetland habitat for a lot of native plants, birds, and fish species. Jackson will mention this a little bit, but it's got a lot of designations on the property. It's a significant area for birds, amphibians, generally a lot of scientific interest too. It's a lot of research that happens in the EcoPark or in Cootes Paradise. It's an outstanding natural space. That, and to loop it back to our previous conversation about wildlife corridors and just connectivity in general, it sits at the bottom of several watersheds. It also receives everything that goes down through those watersheds. So if we're concerned about what lives in the marsh, we have to be aware of what's happening around its landscape, its connection to the areas around it. It's also valued by people. It's an awesome place to go birding. It's a place you can get on the water. It has lots of natural value. It's a major flyway for birds to learn about and home to a lot of different other wildlife, like the Blandings turtle, wetlands in the EcoPark, or sorry, I keep saying EcoPark system. Wetlands in Cootes Paradise are part of what's called an impara, which is an important amphibian and reptile area, noted for the amount of species at risk that are within its waters, including the Blandings turtle. One interesting one that I recently found out is in Cootes Paradise are clams, and a variety of ones that are endangered. That's something you might not see when you first look at it or walk by Cootes Paradise, but they're there. We want to look at the Burlington side of the EcoPark system. We're talking about North Aldershot, which contains several ravines, many Carolinian tree species, lots of creeks. The Jefferson salamander calls it home. And since 2012, a really interesting initiative from one of the EcoPark system partners, City of Burlington, they've been closing a portion of King Road so that salamanders can do their migration, which I think is really cool. And they're a provincially protected endangered species. If we go down towards like Aldershot proper, we get into the lower grindstone. This is also called Henry Valley of RBG. I really like the photo. It's a really interesting example and kind of shows what EcoPark system and connectivity when we talk about nature in urban areas is all about. You can see that it's developed areas, whether it's RBG, cemeteries, houses. These are right beside really significant natural areas. It's a really good example of that juxtaposition between nature and developed, urban and natural. It's a reminder that for us, we've got to be respectful and engaged with our neighbors, the folks who live here too. The lower grindstone, which is kind of a zoomed in photo here, is rich. It's filled with biodiversity. And I don't know, I think it's kind of amazing that this photo is like 100 yards away from a 400 series highway. Fun fact, if you follow sort of Plains Road and York Road, where it splits off, there is an osprey nest there too. So you can definitely check out and see what they're up to. You don't need to think big when you talk birds either. Here is a common white-throat sparrow. There's a recent study talking about how hearing birds, having birds around your house, going out on walks and seeing birds does a lot for people's mental health. It makes where they live a great place. So even a common small species like this is important when you look at it from that angle. But here's the thing about wildlife. They don't look at or understand property boundaries so much. So when they start losing land and green spaces, they tend to wander. So, if we want to maintain biodiversity, we have to pay attention to this, sort of acknowledge where we build roads, what we put alongside of those roads. They have to support animal and wildlife. And that's kind of where the ecopark system fits in. I mentioned this last week. That's the in-between area we try to work at between our partner agencies and that natural and urban landscape. What are the in-between common issues where we can work together better? This also loops back to that conversation we had about connectivity last week. We can see really important ecological connections for wildlife in this area and why they're important. I kind of mentioned it last week. The ecopark system, it really isn't a new thing. It's been years and years of collaboration in Hamilton and Burlington to protect these natural areas. One really interesting example was in the 90s, where Dundas citizens were really, really interested and passionate about maintaining open space along Cootes Paradise Marsh and the Niagara Escarpment, keep development out of this area. I mention this because this is the last place that animals can move freely between the Niagara Escarpment and the coastal wetlands of Lake Ontario. So if you look at this map, here's Cootes Paradise. Here's the area I'm talking about. It's also known as Pleasant View, and it rides along the escarpment all the way down to Burlington here too. In 1994, because of a lot of scientific input and the work of these citizens, a decision was made by the province, which effectively held back development in this area. They said that you can develop, but only on a 10-hectare property, which slowed down any kind of construction to a halt. And these rules are still in place, which is kind of neat. And it's that kind of work that brought the ecopark system together in the early 2000s. So I just want to highlight that example. And before I hand it off to Jackson, I'll do, as promised last week, I'll do a quick highlight of an interesting research project we've been doing over the last year. So yeah, we always want to do more to help our partners learn more, be better resources. And one thing we did was what we're calling a wildlife corridor study. It's a lot of math and computer modeling, but with the support of the Greenbelt Foundation, we took a look at our study area and tried to get a sense of where the best ecological corridors are. I won't go into details of how it was necessarily done, but we essentially mapped out electronic versions of some certain animals to see where these connections exist using public mapping and partner agency mapping. A project like this actually happened back in 2015, but across all of Ontario. These funky looking maps are what the study looked like in our area. So you can kind of see Cootes Paradise Marsh here. Cootes Paradise Marsh here. This is all Hamilton Harbor. The one on the left is that 2015 study. It was done by Bowman and Cortez and was at a 100 by 100 meter value. So each pixel is like a hectare. Not very clear. Our study got that down to 15 by 15 meters, which means much, much, much more clarity. 44 times more, if we want to get specific. You can start seeing individual roads and streams, and with our partners, try to make judgments on where we can focus our restoration efforts. Where are some obvious barriers and challenges? We use these models to kind of predict where animals could go, and there are some really interesting results. This thick red line, that's that Pleasant View area. So it was really nice to see that confirmation that yes, that is an important ecological connection between Cootes Paradise Marsh and then the escarpment. What's really interesting is this connection too along the escarpment, suggesting that there are ways to get across. You can also head down towards Hamilton Harbor and Aldershot. What I find particularly interesting are these yellow lines. It's kind of suggesting that this area in particular is sort of a hub between natural areas outside of our study area. You can kind of see these connections coming out here into the Dundas Valley, or up here into other areas of Burlington. Now, we didn't have any species that were aquatic, so we weren't able to see how or where the connections were going into Hamilton Harbor. And there was an interesting one here of going into downtown Hamilton. So yeah, this was interesting. It really enforces some of the thoughts we have, and it provides some interesting guidance for our work moving forward. Now, the fun thing about this map is there's a lot of light green, which is privately owned outreach areas. What I want to talk about today is sort of that, what folks in and around the EcoPark system are doing to restore natural areas and steward their properties. Before I hop into that, though, kind of wanted to do a highlight reel of some on-the-ground restoration projects on partner-owned properties that we've been doing to kind of give a picture of what it is that we're doing on the ground. I've talked about research before. I talked about the history of this area, but what does this all look on the ground today? Here's a really good example. It's a Hamilton Conservation Authority property called Canal Park. It's actually a former greenhouse in Dundas. It has been re-landscaped, naturalized, a trail system was put in, a lot of which was done by volunteers. We're kind of looking at this property as the gateway to the EcoPark system at its western end. If I go back, it's right around here. It's a really, really interesting area. Just a great story of like, if you look at this picture, there's industry right here, baseball diamond and things like that. So it's right in the heart of an urban area. How about Rockcliffe Park? If you're looking at this and seeing a Rona yard, you're right, it is a Rona yard, but it backs onto what used to be a quarry, a limestone quarry, up near Highway 5, sort of around the corner of Highway 5 and Highway 6, a place called Clappison Corner. It's being turned into a beautiful space of recovery. EcoPark system partners are working together to bring in more natural green space, even a walking trail. You can kind of see the trail starting along here. There's also a wetland that's been installed. Trails also connect through Waterdown. And again, it's pretty wild to think about that a photo like this is yards away from Arona. And you wouldn't think it's so close to development, which is, I think, pretty neat. For folks who came out to our pop-up booth last week, this might look familiar. It is Kerncliffe Park, also a former quarry. It's an interesting question. What do you do when the economic activity is done in a quarry? One fantastic thing is rehab. It's a great opportunity to rehabilitate a natural area. I think Kerncliffe Park is an excellent example. Here's another angle of what the quarry has turned to. You can see Hamilton, you can see Burlington. It's got a lovely, lovely series of hikes as well. This is probably one of my favorite spots in the EcoPark system. It's a conservation Halton property called Hopkins Tract. It's in the Pleasant View area. For folks who might remember from the last talk we did, Pleasant View was protected by the work of concerned Dundas citizens who wanted to make sure the space between Cootes Paradise Marsh and the Niagara Escarpment in Dundas remains natural. This particular spot was actually a farm up until 2015, and it's now being revitalized by Conservation Halton. Their goal is to mimic an old forest. If you look closely, you can see these little pits, almost like little bogs and filled with logs as well. And the idea is to give it a sense of old fallen trees, which amphibians just love. It's a breeding hotspot for a variety of different species. Here's another angle. I just kind of like this photo. It's by RBG's head of science, Dr. David Galbraith, on his drive to work in the morning. Little water, or not a waterfall, rainbow. And again, really good angle. You can kind of see why it's called Pleasant View. You can see the horizon of Hamilton just right here. It's pretty great. Focusing more on a more urban area, just a really quick highlight of some work we do. These are called bioswells. Folks who aren't familiar with bioswells, they're probably one of the best ways to manage stormwater in a residential area. This particular one is right across the street from RBG in an area called Brighton Beach in Ancaster. Nope, Aldershot, the other A. It's a really good example of what we try and facilitate and make happen in folks' front yard, essentially. It's pretty exciting.